Hi, so this is section B2, anxieties, page 116. So, anxiety is a negative emotional state. It's described as a negative emotional state. So examples of that would be nervousness, apprehension, worry and concern. So it's a cognitive state. Anxiety is something in your brain. It makes the body feel uncomfortable. It doesn't like being anxious. So the body tries to be in a homeostatic state, it's called. That's not in your book, so you don't need to know that word. But it means normal. It means that it's running as normal. And the body can feel stress. And when it feels stress, physiologically, things start going wrong. And anxiety is the same. It's a worry. It's a concern about something. And the body can make adaptations for it, can respond to it with stress hormones and things like that and increase heart rate, and it really doesn't like to be like that. So your body's always fighting against it, trying to get back to normal. However, anxiety, it should be noted, isn't bad. Again, it's very similar to stress. Most of the time it is bad. It has negative connotations on your sport and activity, but it can serve as a positive in terms of if you've only got it a small amount, then it can give you a little bit of focus. Because it can make you work harder. But generally speaking, when we're talking about anxiety, we are talking about a negative thing, and that is because it is linked with high levels of arousal and distress rather than eustress. So it's linked, anxiety is a cognitive emotional state that's linked to high levels of arousal and high levels of stress. And therefore, if we're talking of high levels of stress, we're talking about distress. So we did this in lesson. I'm not sure whether you remember or not. We drew the inverted U hypothesis. So it looked very similar to this. We drew on the IPS, which is the optimal point for performance. The book user ruler. It's here, look. And this is also the point of eustress. So this is where stress is a positive thing. On this side, on the under-aroused side, people will feel relaxed on this side. That is not a good thing. It's low levels of arousal, and it's also pretty much low levels of performance, certainly not at peak performance if performance is down this side here. So you've got relaxed performance here. You've got eustress at the point of IPS, your ideal performance state. So that means if you are overstressed, you've got the distress on this side. So high levels of stress is distress. And therefore, you've got anxiety. Because anxiety is linked with high levels of stress, which is distress. So it's this bit here, and you can see how it's going to affect performance. It's going to make your level of performance reduce if you are anxious. If you have a small amount of anxiety, it's not necessarily a terrible thing to happen. But when we're getting into these bits here, so it's fairly high, moderately high to high, anxiety is going to have quite a detrimental effect on performance. Right, moving on to different types of anxiety. We've got trait anxiety and state anxiety. We have mentioned them before. We've now done a test on them as well, on the CSAI test, the competitive state anxiety inventory. So you've all looked at your levels of self-confidence, trait anxiety, state anxiety. So trait anxiety was the type of anxiety that you take to global situations. So all competitive situations would be competitive trait anxiety. Every situation, like an exam, like competition, like starting a new job, driving lessons, if you approach every situation and perceive it, so you see it as a threat, then we say you've got quite high trait anxiety. And likewise, if it's every situation and you don't tend to get stressed, you're like, yeah, it'll happen, what will be, will be. You've got a more relaxed attitude to it, then you have low trait anxiety. So traits were the innate qualities that are often linked to personality. So they call them personality traits. So they're not likely to change that much. They can be, you can learn to control them, but you will still have a tendency to approach most areas with worry and apprehension. So state anxiety is what's happening in the current and present moment, and it's situation specific. So it may be that school games don't stress you out whatsoever. You have no anxiety about them at all. You're quite confident about them. You don't really worried. You're not too bothered. However, if you play for your region, then you do get stressed and anxious, and that could be to do with how important you perceive those to be, which we talked about in B2 stress. Excuse me. So anxiety in the current then and now situation. So for example, prior to competition, and we sat the CSAI test. I know we had to do it hypothetically speaking, but we sat it as if we were directly prior to a competition. And then before that, so we looked at 2 states of anxiety and we compared them, and then we talked about the pros and cons of them. So the state anxiety has a relationship, that's what my little heart stands for, a relationship with trait anxiety. State and trait are related in terms that if you have a high trait anxiety, so a tendency to approach every situation with anxiety, with nervousness and apprehension, you will also have increased levels of state anxiety. So moving on to competitive anxiety. So this is the level of anxiety that people get in competitive situations. So it's an increased level of stress response in competitive situations. And it can be competitive state anxiety. So as it is at that moment in relation to a competition, or globally, how you approach all competitive situations. So you've got trait anxiety, global anxiety, state anxiety, just that situation but to any area, and competitive state at that moment relating to a competition, and competitive trait at that, all situations as long as they're competitive. So state, trait, competitive state and competitive trait. So symptoms of stress and anxiety, how do they manifest themselves? So first of all, you get a stress response to protect yourself. So it's the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the nervous system that gets things done. It speeds things up in the body. And what happens is if you see or you're told you're going to be doing this, then you'll get an immediate response. So let's say your coach has said, right, I know you were sub, someone's dropped out, you're on, or they have an injury halfway through, you can see that you're going to have to go on and get warmed up. Your immediate response is an increase in heart rate and breathing rate, and that happens because of the release of your stress hormones, of your stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. They're released by the body because the body perceives you to have been put under stress. So your brain has said, oh, you're going to be put under a stressful situation. So this fight or flight response is activated. And it's activated via the sympathetic nervous system, and it releases adrenaline and cortisol. And these are collectively known as your stress hormones. And they increase heart rate, breathing rate, and reduce reaction time to try and get you ready for a good performance quickly. There are 3 types of response. And I hope now that we're quite familiar with these words, but cognitive response, what happens in your brain, how your brain responds to it. It might become more alert. And somatic responses, so an increase in breathing rate and heart rate, so they're the physiological responses. And a behavioural response, so that's what we actually see. So if you're waiting to go on, waiting for your driving test, waiting for an exam. Some people can be moody and grumpy and go very quiet, but that's a sign of like a physical sign. You can see it as an action, if you like, of a response to stress. Some people never stop talking and just keep going, rather like me at the moment. Some people fidget quite a lot. People can interrupt conversations because their reactions are just a little bit out of kilter because they're not really thinking straight, and that's due to attentional narrowing and things. and accidents and clumsiness, so it can affect the physical side of things where you bump into things, and it's all down to being anxious in a negative aspect. So you've got 3 responses: feelings of nervousness, apprehension and worry. You've got the somatic, which is things like increased heart rate, breathing rate, butterflies in your tummy, feeling sick, nausea. And then you've got your behavioural, the things that people can actually see. So talking too much, fidgeting, being grumpy and going very, very quiet, being clumsy, and various things like that. Okay, so now we're going to look at anxiety as what some people call a multidimensional theory. So it says anxiety is affected by 3 different things, and there is a relationship between these things, and these things all added together will basically change your level of anxiety and your performance, therefore. So there is a relationship between cognitive, what's in your brain, state anxiety at that moment, somatic state, so that is a physiological symptoms like heart rate, breathing rate, nausea in that moment, and self-confidence, which is a global term to describe how well you think you can cope with something. So anxiety, so you've got self-confidence here, your expectation of success, how well you think you're going to do. If it's positive, if confidence is up and you've got feelings of positivity, you think you're going to do well, you expect to win, then the increase of self-confidence will therefore increase your performance. As simple as that. But if you have low levels of self-confidence, so basically you think you are going to fail, like, oh, I don't think I can do this, then low levels of self-confidence mean you will have low levels of performance. This is the thought that if you think you can do it, you can do it. If you think you can't do it, you won't be able to. If we look at the cognitive aspect of it here, so we're looking at the mental aspect, if there is an increase in cognitive anxiety, so increase in worry and apprehension, then it will decrease performance. And we've discussed why that is. That's due to attentional narrowing. And if you have high levels of somatic anxiety, then you can have an increase in performance, but only up to a certain point, and then it decreases. So I've mentioned this before. I can't remember whether it was this video or the last one. But somatic, the physiological, the heart rate, the breathing rate, does get you ready for activity up to a certain point. But if it gets to the point where your hands are physically shaking too much, then it can interfere with the technique. So if you think about bowling in cricket, I think it's called the yips, when people can't let go of the ball and it goes off at all sorts of different angles, and that's due to anxiety. And the more that you get it wrong, the worse it gets. But it could be that you've just got shaky hands and it completely disrupts the release of the ball and then deteriorates your performance. But up to a certain point, it actually has a positive effect. So we've got self-confidence. If you think you can do it, you can. If you think you can't, you won't. You've got cognitive anxiety or apprehension, and if you've got increased levels of that, high levels of that is going to decrease your performance through attentional narrowing. And if you have a somatic response, actually it's beneficial, but only up to a certain point, and then it will interfere with technique. So this last theory that we need to talk to is called reversal theory. And this is a theory that's come out to say, well, okay, we know people get anxious, we know they're going to get nervous and they're going to be apprehensive, we know they're going to have a stress response. And if they think the game's important and it means quite a lot to them and they're uncertain of the outcome, then they're going to have a bigger stress response. So all of that has been accepted. However, the theory then says if you can encourage, as a coach, if you can encourage, or as an athlete yourself, your stress response as a positive thing, then it'll actually increase performance. So by that I mean, okay, you're going to get nervous, you're going to feel sick, you're going to be a bit shaky, you might be fidgeting, you might be unable to relax, you can't sit down and you're just walking around and pacing and you've got this increase in heart rate and breathing rate. If you see it as a positive thing, so if you think, oh, that just means I'm really ready for it, I'm really psyched up, I'm ready to get on the pitch, come on, let the game start, let's go for it. So if you're going down this route here, the positive, that's a plus and a V, positive, then you'll see it as a pleasurable thing. It means that you are ready for performance, and I've just phrased it up as you're well up for the game. If you perceive it as a negative thing, so you see all of these symptoms and you're like, oh God, I'm never going to be able to do it. Oh, my hands are shaking too much to be able to release the ball properly. And you're thinking, oh, I'm so nervous. You're thinking negatively. Then your stress response will have a detrimental effect on your performance. So the reversal theory accepts that you're going to get a stress response, but it says you should encourage athletes to see it as a positive thing and not a negative thing. If you see it as a positive thing, it may have no detrimental effect on your performance, or it could actually have a positive effect on your performance. If you perceive all of these symptoms as a bad thing, as a negative aspect, then it will have detrimental effects. Okay, this is section B3, page 118. So we're just going to sum up, really, the consequences of stress and anxiety. So we're going to start up here. How stress affects performance depends on personality. So your trait. Do you have high trait anxiety or low trait anxiety? Do you have a predisposition to behave with anxiousness, apprehension, nervousness and negative thoughts? Stress response was your level of reaction to the task that's being asked of you. If you have a high level of stress response, so i.e. if you have trait anxiety, so high trait anxiety in all situations, or your stress response could be quite a relaxed one, which meaning you've probably got quite low trait or state actually anxiety. So it also depends on the task and the skill that's being required of you, and these are the things that you're going to ask yourself when you're making this perception of whether you can cope or not. So first of all, is it well learned or a new skill? If it's a well learned skill, then the chances are that you will have a lower stress response. If it's a new skill and what we call in the cognitive stage, you'll probably have a higher stress response because your perception would be, well, I'm not really very confident on this skill. I still make mistakes when I'm doing it. I still have to think about it. So any extra pressure will probably make you go wrong. Link that back to the drive theory, for example. Is it a difficult or easy task? If it's a difficult task, you're going to be more affected by stress. If it's an easy task, you actually might be facilitated by stress. In that, if it's a task that's fairly straightforward, like lifting a weight up, so you've done your technique thousands of times before, you've got no decision making, but yet you feel it's an important thing to do, an important match, well, not match, an important competition, then you'll probably be driven by stress. The same example could be true of the simple or complex skills. So this referred to how many decisions you had to make. This is lots of decisions. This is no decision. So if you are doing a simple skill, you're less likely to be affected by stress and anxiety than a complex skill, because that involves decision making. And we know now that anxiety messes with our levels of attention and concentration. Gross and fine skills. Somatically speaking, if it's a gross skill, if you've got shaky hands, it's not going to affect you as much. It's not going to have as much of a detrimental effect as if you are trying to play snooker or darts and you've got a shaky hand. Interpretation and perception. This is the most important thing in relation to how much stress you're going to have. If you perceive anxiety and stress responses to be a negative aspect, it's going to have a detrimental effect on your performance. And if you see them as positive, actually it can facilitate your performance. Okay. So, negative aspect of it, arousal increases too much for an athlete to cope. The stress responses, they get cognitive and somatic anxiety, and those levels are high. That has negative effects on the performance. They have a negative mindset and it reduces self-confidence, and it can lead to mistakes and injuries. So arousal increases too much. They're given a task they don't think they can cope with it. They're perceived to fail at. They perceive it, their own personal thoughts. The stress response is that they have high levels of anxiety and worry and concern, shaky hands, feeling sick. It affects their performance in a negative way. It makes them think for the future that they're going to fail, which reduces their self-confidence. So next time they go into a similar task, they're going to think, or even more negatively than they did initially. And it leads to mistakes and injuries and aggression, and it can be a long-term thing. If they see it as positive, you get an increased level of arousal initially, but the stress response is where anxiety will increase, but only up to a certain point. So if you remember, we drew the inverted U and we said anxiety or distress probably starts at about here. So if you see it positively, we're still up at the top of this thing, of the inverted U. So it actually increases our energy and focus. It increases our motivation and drive, and therefore our task persistence. So when we're in training, if we have got a small stress response with an increasing anxiety, we don't want to go wrong, so we're going to work harder to make sure we don't go wrong. We're not thinking we can't do it, we're just thinking, right, I need to get prepared for this, I need to get ready so I'm not feeling like this before the activity itself. Therefore, it increases your self-confidence if you train harder, or if you work harder, even if it was just a game situation, but you go in feeling confident, and therefore, because you're feeling confident and you're perceiving all of these somatic stress responses, the shaking hands, as a positive thing, to just that you're ready for the activity, then your performance will increase. And that's it for section B3.